Welcome to the Mike Bates Show. This is Mike Bates. I'm at the Escambia County Courthouse in the chambers of Circuit Judge Tom Danheiser, and also Circuit Judge Gary Burgash is with us as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you speaking to us.
Good to see you, Mike.
As circuit court judges, you both handle a wide range of cases. On the civil side, it could be something as simple as probate. On the criminal side, it's capital murder, right?
Correct. It's a very wide range of cases. Crimes from felony petty theft to capital murder involving the death penalty, and civil hearings.
So what prompted this interview with you today, Tom, was that you and I have had this conversation off the air about a risk factor of people being likely to commit crimes and being likely, therefore, to appear before you in your courtroom that you have told me is far and away greater than any other risk factor known. What is it?
It's clear, and the science is undeniable, and that factor is the absence of a father in the household. In fact, there's some good wording when Barack Obama was running for president in 2008. He gave a fatherhood speech, and to quote from him, he said, "We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison." So that is far and away the leading factor leading to a young person ending up in a life in crime. There's no other variable that even comes close.
Even more so than poverty, fatherhood makes a difference?
Absolutely. In fact, for intact families, I don't see in the statistics any meaningful connection between low income and crime. Regardless of your income level, it is the absence of a father in the household which is the variable. I don't see young people in court from shooting someone, for selling drugs, from a poor intact family. That just doesn't happen. Because with an intact family, there's the supervision and the example where a young person just doesn't start off down that track.
Judge Burgash, do you see a similar correlation as well in your courtroom?
Yes, 100%. You asked a question, not a relationship with poverty. Make no mistake, if it's a single-parent family, and we'll just say here a mother and children and no father, they're, whatever the statistics are, times more likely to be in poverty. So there may be that statistical relationship, but a poor family that's intact with an example of a father and a mother, we don't see those criminal behaviors. We see it in fatherless families, and I see it absolutely every day in my courtroom. And Judge Danheiser and I both ask a lot of questions of our defendants. And one question I'll ask is, tell me about your family, especially with young people. I'll say 23 and under. Who do you live with? I live with my grandmother. Who's in the home with you? My cousin, my brother, and 4 other cousins. Who else is in the home? No one else. Where's your father? I don't know him. Tell me, did you graduate from high school? Well, I finished a program. Well, tell me the last high school you went to. I never made it. Well, where did you go? I went to some middle school in Pensacola. Then I went into a program, and then I finished. Everything Judge Danheiser just said, I saw it as a school board member with people that were disciplined, kids that were disciplined, fatherless families. Then I see it in court with the questions I ask and with the background I get to know. Fatherless families, the number one reason young men, and let's face it, it's young men, look at the statistics, 2.4 million people incarcerated, of which 2.2 million are males. Young men without fathers committing crimes, very heinous crimes a lot of the time.
So there may be a correlation with poverty, but if the cause of that poverty is the fatherless home, then the poverty's not the cause of the crime. The fatherless homes is the cause of the crime.
Absolutely correct, Mike. And the science is undeniable.
So if a poor family, because let's face it, some poor families do have intact mother-father-child relationships, traditional nuclear families. If a family is intact, they can still be poor. But you're saying you typically don't see them in your courtroom.
Absolutely. It's a rarity. I would sentence a young man to prison with an intact family. When the main question, there will be a mother in the courtroom when, as Judge Burgash pointed out, primarily a son being sentenced, And the main issue the mother will bring up is the fact that he grew up without a father or a father figure, which is obvious. It's the prevailing issue in the vast majority of cases. In fact, if you read in the paper, unfortunately in Escambia County, we have young men killing young men almost weekly. And almost every one I look into the case, and in almost every instance, the person who was killed doesn't have a father in the household, and the person who pulled the trigger doesn't have a father in the household. But we never talk about it, and it's shameful that we don't talk about it. I feel like I'm working in a lung cancer ward where we're prohibited from talking about cigarette smoking. And it needs to end because nothing's going to change. We're going to do one of two things. We're going to build more prisons, more jails, more police, more judges, or more fathers. I prefer more fathers to more judges, police officers, jails, and prisons.
Your analogy to smoking and lung cancer was an interesting one. Is the evidence of fatherless homes being that contributory to the likelihood of crime that significant? With as much significance as smoking is to lung cancer?
Amazingly, it's almost identical. According to the American Lung Cancer Society, smoking cigarettes leads to an approximate 20 times more likelihood of contracting lung cancer. And it's the exact same odds of having a fatherless family impacting your chances of ending up in prison 20 times. Can you imagine a lung cancer program where we didn't talk about cigarette smoking? Of course, now our lung cancer rates are greatly reduced because we were successful in changing behaviors. Because first, people talked about it. And that's a lot of the problem, just talking about it, causing the discussion where people recognize the issue so behaviors can be changed. And behaviors changed on cigarette smoking, and that was nicotine, one of the most addictive substances in the world, and we were able to bend that curve. Well, I think we can bend this curve too.
Mike, I think it takes courage, too, for people to speak out about this. Make no mistake, we're not faulting the child or even the mother. Sometimes things happen, but there are fathers who have kids that choose to not participate in their lives. Now, maybe they're incarcerated. Of course, that's their fault for doing something wrong. But we've got to address this. And again, we don't want to make anyone feel bad, but the statistics are the statistics.
And I'm a little less concerned about hurting people's feelings because I'm more concerned about the kids. And people's feelings do need to be hurt because we do need to have a bit of shame, understanding that no one's perfect and we want to help people who have difficult times in their life. But people have responsibilities for their children to live responsible lives. And I really want to make feel bad those fathers who are abandoning their children. It is shameful. We have in Escambia County over half the children born every year are born into a home without a father. Can you imagine if that statistic was half the children were born into a home without a mother? We would panic and go crazy, but nobody even talks about it.
Well, we will continue this discussion with Circuit Judges Tom Danheiser and Gary Burgash when the Mike Bates Show continues. Welcome back to the Mike Bates Show. This is Mike Bates. I'm at the Escambia County Courthouse in the chambers of Circuit Judge Tom Danheiser, and joining us is also Circuit Judge Gary Burgash, both from the First Judicial Circuit of Florida. We were talking in the last segment about the absence of fathers in the home and it being a direct correlation to the young men who appear before the two of you in court having committed crimes. You said it's mostly men. Are young women who grow up in fatherless homes, are they adversely affected by the absence of a father as well?
Yes, girls who grow up in fatherless homes are also equally impacted. Women, of course, are not involved pro rata in as many violent crimes as young men, but it'll show up in that a young woman who doesn't have a father in the home will, of course, be much more likely to end up in poverty, much more likely to herself become a teenager, unwed teenager with children, more likely to be addicted to drugs, more likely to commit crimes and end up in prison. So the statistics are very similar.
So this may call for speculation. And if it is, feel free to tell me to move on if you don't feel like speculating. But is part of the reason that young women who grow up in fatherless homes, they themselves end up becoming pregnant without being married and then become the single parent fatherless household themselves, is that because they're seeking a male figure that will love them like their father didn't?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. I imagine one thing is looking for purpose in life. And I think to some young women, having a child gives them purpose. But to be responsible, a person needs to be prepared for that child so they can properly care for them and raise them. And it's very hard for one parent. It doesn't matter if it's a single mother or a single father. Sure, you can do it. It's done all the time, but it's a heck of a lot harder. It's like living life with a 20-pound weight tied to your leg. Yeah, you can overcome it, but you're at a much greater disadvantage than the two-parent family, where if one parent is sick, the other one can pitch in. If one has to go to work, the other one can help with the homework. But if you're a single parent and you got to work at night and the child's left at home alone or left home with a boyfriend or with some girlfriend, that child doesn't have a chance of competing with the child who has two parents to care for them.
I agree with Judge Danheiser on all of that. I'll speculate a little more. I do think that's part of it. I do think their role models are single mothers. I think there's an economic part of it as well. They understand that they're going to get money because of the kids. But like Judge Danheiser said, and we all understand, a single mother, a single father is going to have a harder time than two parents with two kids. Now, I think I'm unique in some respects with Judge Danheiser. My mom was a single mom until I was about 10, and she met my dad, who was enlisted in the Navy. Statistics will show kids that come from single-parent families, mostly with mothers, they have an obesity problem. I was a little heavy. My dad adopted me, and pretty soon he was an outdoors kind of guy and a sports kind of guy. So he goes, you need to go out for some team. I don't care what it is. So I got on the wrestling team, and I lost a lot of weight, and I got in shape, and I was doing pull-ups, and I had a mindset of I wanted to go into the military. These things all are higher in these single families, and I think you're right. I will speculate that they're looking for love. There's an example, a generational example, and there's money tied to it.
So, Judge Burgash, the house you grew up in, your father adopted you. You did not grow up with your biological father?
Right. He was a Navy man, PTSD from Vietnam, had made a threat to murder my mom and us. My mom just left and moved. We moved every 18 months or so. And we came here to Pensacola. She met my dad. He adopted me, and we moved to Japan. And then we moved back to Pensacola. I graduated from high school. So I have a unique opportunity to reflect on my life and see that I had a dad at a time right before I hit puberty when a lot of these kids rebel against their mothers. So what does a mom who's 5'2" or 5'3" like my mom do with a boy who's 5'10" and 200 pounds? What is she going to do when she says, go do this? And he says, no, I'm not going to. And that's what you see where their dad could come in there. We don't want anybody abused, of course, or hurt. But when the dad comes in and says, you're going to do it, Junior, he does it.
Judge Danheiser, this question is for you. You've obviously made the case that a father in the home is critically important. That's backed up not only with your anecdotal evidence of what you see in your courtroom, but the nationwide statistics. Every study confirms what you're saying. How good does that father have to be? Is it simply the presence of dad in the house, or does dad need to be actively involved and kind of a mature, responsible person himself?
Well, of course, optimally, every father would be the best father they could be. But frankly, my bar is kind of low at this point. And if I could just get the father in the home, that would be a major game changer. But absolutely, every father, even if you are in the home, needs to be responsible, needs to be a leader, needs to be an example for their children. But if you're not in the home, that's not going to happen. At least if the father's in the home, there's a good likelihood those positive impacts are going to help the children.
So unless dad is, a drug addict who's passed out all the time, I suppose he'd still be performing some role as an authority figure that you would think would command at least some respect in the household. And doesn't that help guide the kid in the right direction?
I understand your point, but there are some families where the children would be better off without the father. If it's some alcoholic or drug addict or someone who's involved in criminal behavior. But statistically, that's not the case. Intact families just don't have statistically, meaningfully, those traits. Of course, there's the outliers. There's the person who smokes cigarettes every day of their life and lives to be 100. There's the person who never wears a seatbelt their whole life and never gets hurt in a wreck. But the statistics prove overall that smoking destroys your health, that not wearing a seatbelt leads to a much higher chance of being killed in a car accident, and just not physically having the father in the home is a direct cause of all these social ills. So if we could just get the father in the home, then we can work on making them the best father possible. But the first step in this community is just getting the fathers to be in the home.
And Mike, I agree with Judge Danhauser, and again, he's the leader on this, and he's more vocal about it than I am, and we're in the same suite here, and we talk about this, but he really is a champion of this. But I can tell you he's absolutely right on this. If you can get the dad in the home, and he's not abusing or abandoning the kids or neglecting them or using drugs or criminal behavior, that's probably the 85% solution. What's the other 15%? My church was involved with what they called the Great Family Network, and you would get the family that was going to be mentored and 2 other families, or 3, depending on how many you could get, and they would rotate like every other weekend, spending time with that family. Not really spending money, but just doing things that didn't cost money and modeling behavior. Hey, this is how we go out. Oh, the kids spilled Cheerios all over the counter. What do? Well, you get a big beach towel and you clean it up real quick, you put it in the washing machine and wash it. You don't beat the kids, and so you model this behavior, which takes, I don't know if government can do it. It's going to have to take, again, I talk about folks driving over the bridge and going to a gated neighborhood. Folks are going to have to go outside themselves. So hopefully the first step is dads participating in their families, and then the community helping model those behaviors and being good mentors. And that doesn't mean money. How do you spell love? I tell this in my courtroom and to my kids. How do you spell love? It's not L-O-V-E. It's T-I-M-E. You've got to give time. That spells love.
Just the presence of the father in the home, you think, is maybe not always enough, but usually enough.
That's far and away the biggest issue. We can fine-tune fathers once they get in the home, but the young men I see in court are not in court because they had a father in their lives, but their father was not Father of the Year. They're before me in court, and they're going to prison because their father was never in their life, period. That's the factor.
And Mike, I'm just going to echo what he says. I cannot tell you the number of times I have sentenced young people age 25 and under, and make no mistake, I've sentenced young men that age and younger to life in prison. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen a dad come in with those young men. I mean, I couldn't count it on one hand. I see their moms, I see their grandmas, I might see a sibling, but on one hand, I could tell you when I saw their fathers. They typically come in, I'm going to hear from everybody in the family, but I don't hear from a dad.
Well, we're not born with owner's manuals, and it's sometimes tough to know, how to raise your kids, but I concur. I mean, I came up in a very good home. I mean, my dad and I sure didn't see eye to eye on everything, but who can honestly say they did with their fathers, right? But my father was in the military. He certainly disciplined us. I mean, it was a strict home. Probably looking back, I wouldn't say overly strict, although I certainly thought so at the time. But I had a father who was very involved. We went to church every Sunday. We had dinner together every night. I have 3 siblings. He coached our sports teams. He was very involved. And this is a man who was deployed at sea from time to time, right? And he was still super involved in my life and the lives of my 3 brothers as well. And I'd say we all 4 turned out okay. And my mother was wonderful, but ain't no way she'd have been able to do that alone.
Absolutely. Same with me. No way my mother could have raised 3 boys and controlled us appropriately. but it's just the example that a father gives, particularly a young man, but also a young woman, just by showing them how to live and how to be responsible. Then the results are just natural.
Let's take another break, and then we will come back and we will continue our conversation with Judges Tom Danheiser and Gary Burgash when the Mike Bates Show continues. Welcome back to the Mike Bates Show. This is Mike Bates. I'm at the Escambia County Courthouse in the chambers of Circuit Judge Tom Danheiser, and Circuit Judge Gary Burgash is with us as well. Tom, is this a problem that is relatively new, or has the problem of fatherless homes always existed? We just didn't really hear much about it.
No, it is relatively new. Frankly, it started about 1970. In fact, I've got a chart for Escambia County. In 1970, the out-of-wedlock birth rate in Escambia across the whole population was just over 10%. Starting approximately 10 years ago, it reached and exceeded 50% and still maintains and hovers right over that 50% mark. So it is a new problem. It is not the natural state of affairs. It shouldn't be the natural state of affairs. And just like that problem has increased, the curve can be bent and brought back down to a healthy level. The first thing is we just need to talk about it and quit ignoring it.
What do you think is the cause of that? 10% to now more than 50%? That's not an insignificant increase. What do you think caused that?
Well, there's a lot of theories. Government programs which incentivize fatherless families, I'm sure, is a big component, but also a loss in society of shame, that fathers somehow are given this moral immunity from abandoning their children, and there is no shame. We do have shame for mothers who do that, but unfortunately in society, people have become numb to it, and therefore it has not been self-correcting. We need to re-inject the conversation of fatherless families that it is irresponsible, that fathers need to man up, they need to take care of their children, they need to be in their children's lives every day. Sending a couple $100 to the mother every month is not being a father. Being a father is tucking your child in at night, being there when they have a nightmare in the middle of the night, getting them up in the morning and feeding them breakfast and working on their school. So for some reason, we are quick to condemn mothers who neglect their children, but we give fathers complete moral and criminal immunity for their abandonment. But this curve can easily be turned around. And the first step is to talk about it.
Well, I certainly see how it is a self-perpetuating situation. A fatherless child grows up, becomes capable of producing a child of his own. He didn't have a role model. Daddy wasn't in his house, so to him that's normal. So he gets a woman pregnant out of wedlock. That kid grows up without a dad and just keeps on going. I can certainly see how that would be considered normal. In much the same way that a child of a divorced family is more likely to get divorced himself, right? You know, my parents remained married and still are. I never once would even think of divorcing my wife. Not just because I love her, which I do, but it's just, to me, that's not normal. The normal thing is you work out the problems and you stay married. I would think it would be similar with this fatherless homes thing.
Well, it could be, but it can still be changed. Like I always compare to cigarette smoking, where we had over half the population addicted to one of the most addictive substances, nicotine. And you had children grow up in households where parents smoked. My parents smoked. But society started talking about it. We had programs. Frankly, we started shaming people who smoked. We started passing regulations and enforcing them, discouraging smoking. If we even had programs similar to the anti-smoking campaigns promoting fatherhood, we could have a great effect. But we have nothing. But just look at the success of those anti-smoking campaigns. Nobody went to prison over it. But just the moderate shame and the mild regulation of cigarette smoking was enough to totally bend that curve from where a majority of the population smoked to where now it's a very small minority. And again, we were talking about an addictive substance.
You say we have nothing. I actually think it's worse than that. I don't think it's that we have nothing. I think it's that we do have the opposite. We have TV shows that glamorize single motherhood. MTV, what was it called? Single Mom or Pregnant at 16 or whatever. Maybe it was both. I don't know. But they had several shows where it glamorized being a young teenage single mom. And if I remember correctly, they even had some contest to see who would be the next single mom to appear on the MTV show, making celebrities out of people who statistically are going to be poor. Now, maybe not that one that's being paid to be on MTV, but most. I think that the entertainment media glamorizes it. And then we have the government programs, which penalize, and you mentioned a moment ago, where you are not eligible for certain welfare benefits if dad lives with you, partly because his income is factored into the equation. But there's a lot of things where if dad's in the home, even if he's not married to mom, if dad's present in the household, government benefits get taken away. Now, is that deliberate? I frankly think it is. You're free to comment on that yourself. I think it's deliberate. I think there's a certain element of people in politics today who want people so dependent on government that they will vote for people who want to expand government and government dependency, that they encourage young women to marry the government instead of marrying the dad.
Well, those may be factors, but what I can say is that I want to disrupt my business model in the court system. This courthouse should be 3 floors, not 6 floors. We should have half the number of judges we have. And I believe despite all these maybe counterproductive programs, improper glamorization through media, we can still address the problem and improve our statistics and improve the lives of our youth. I still think just if we have the discussion, we can make changes that will help the young people in our community and enable judges not to have to send so many young men to prison. So, Mike, there are certainly a lot of factors that have led to this problem, but we're not going to change the world. I'm not expecting to change every government program that may be disincentivizing fatherhood, but we can make significant progress in this community if we just have awareness programs. If the schools would have awareness programs to let the young men and women understand how their life decisions now are going to impact them for the rest of their lives and their children, I think we can make progress in Escambia County.
Because these single moms, they certainly want their kids to have good lives. I mean, I doubt any single mom, unless she's just completely strung out on drugs, has to want what's good for her kid.
Of course, every mother wants the best for their children. And that's why we have ended up with, in half the families, only the mother raising the children. We don't have a problem of half the children in Escambia County living without a mother, because the mothers are there 95+% of the time. It's our fathers who are failing us.
We've got to take our final break. When we get back, I want to address the racial component of this, because I think a lot of claims are made based on race that are inaccurate. Now, you may or may not. We'll talk about it when the Mike Bates Show continues. Welcome back to the Mike Bates Show. This is Mike Bates. I'm at the Escambia County Courthouse in the chambers of Circuit Judge Tom Danheiser. Joining us here is also Circuit Judge Gary Burgash. Judge Danheiser, do you notice in your courtroom a racial component to the fatherless homes? Are black defendants more likely to be fatherless than white defendants? The statistics would seem to indicate that. What do you see?
Well, Mike, I didn't notice it so much in court, but I do study the statistics. And in Escambia County, it is a community-wide problem. There are differences in different ethnicities. In the black community, it's over 70% out-of-wedlock birth rates. In the white community, it's over 30%, approaching 35%. Overall, it's over 50%. But the rate of increase is much greater in the white community than in the black community. The out-of-wedlock birth rates in the black community, the statistics show, have leveled off. The out-of-wedlock birth rates in the white community continue to increase at a greater rate, thus resulting in over half the children in our community being born into a home without a father.
Which is immensely problematic, as we've spent the last 45 or so minutes talking about.
Yes, it's very problematic. Again, it's the only reason I've got a job, unfortunately. Our community leaders need to start talking about it because we can help solve problems on the edges. We can improve test scores here and test scores there. We can get good jobs. We can help employment. But until you address fatherless families, you are not going to address the core issue, which is the underlying factor behind all of these social ills.
There's a political movement right now, and as a judge, you may not want to get political, so feel free. This is Mike Bates saying this. This is not Judge Tom Danheiser saying this. There's a political movement right now that is trying to blame all the problems that the black community is experiencing on white privilege and systemic racism. I don't think it's white privilege. I think it's father privilege. White kids without fathers are in similar dire straits criminally as black kids without fathers, right?
The underlying common denominator for why a young man ends up before me in court is because he didn't have a father in the household. That's the only reason. So I'm not in an ivory tower studying all these other issues, so I'm not going to comment on it. I'm just going to tell you what I see every day up front, person to person, and the people I speak to. When I have a young man come before me, they're just not another file with a number on it. I speak with them, ask them about their lives, where they've been and where they're going. And unquestionably, the factor that caused them to end up before me in court was because they didn't have a father figure in the home.
Well, of all the rocks upon which we build our lives, we are most dependent on the family. The family is that most important foundation. And we are called to recognize and honor how critical every father is to that foundation. They are teachers and coaches, they're mentors, and they're role models. They are examples of success and the men who constantly push us toward success. But if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that too many fathers are also missing. Too many fathers are MIA. Too many fathers are AWOL, missing from too many lives and too many homes. They've abandoned their responsibilities. They're acting like boys instead of men. And the foundations of our families have suffered because of it. You and I know this is true everywhere, but nowhere is it more true than in the African American community. We know that more than half of all black children live in single-parent households. Half. A number that's doubled since we were children. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime. They're 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They're more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teen parents because a father wasn't in the home. The foundations of our community and our country are weaker because of this. Now, Judge Danheiser, the words that I just said to you were not mine. I'd like to play for you. You quoted from the speech earlier. Listen to who actually said those words.
Of all the rocks upon which we build our lives, we are most dependent on the family. The family is that most important foundation. And we are called to recognize and honor how critical every father is to that foundation. They are teachers and coaches, they're mentors, and they're role models. They are examples of success and the men who constantly push us towards success. But if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that too many fathers are also missing. Too many fathers are MIA. Too many fathers are AWOL. Missing from too many lives and too many homes. They've abandoned their responsibilities. They're acting like boys instead of men. And the foundations of our family have suffered because of it. You and I know this is true everywhere, but nowhere is it more true than in the African American community. We know that more than half of all black children live in single-parent households. Half. A number that's doubled since we were children. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime. They're 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They're more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teen parents because the father wasn't in the home. The foundations of our community and our country are weaker because of this.
That was Barack Obama's Father's Day speech at Apostolic Church of God in Chicago on June 15th, 2008. And while I was no fan of Barack Obama, in this instance, he hit the nail on the head. We don't have, in America, a problem of systemic racism. We have a problem in America of systemic unwed motherism. And I think that's irrefutable. Don't you?
Well, I can agree with you that we definitely have a problem of fathers not fulfilling their responsibilities, of having fatherless homes. And just as President Obama bravely spoke up in 2008, our community leaders need to start speaking up. If they care for our youth, if they really care, whether you're a county commissioner or a school board member or a judge or law enforcement, if we don't start talking about this issue, we're fooling ourselves if we think we're going to change anything. If we don't start talking about this issue, be prepared to build a new phase to the county jail 10 years from now. Be prepared to add dozens more law enforcement and more judges. But again, I'd rather see us bend the curve to get fathers back in children's lives and address the root cause of these social ills.
There's not an easy solution to that, though, is there?
Well, actually, I think it is pretty easy, because I think just people talking about it changes behavior. So if we do nothing more than our leaders stepping up and recognizing this problem, which they all know is true, but talking about it, that in and of itself will set an attitude to change the mindset of a community.
Well, the first step in solving a problem is identifying it.
Absolutely.
We've certainly identified it on this program. I know a lot of people listening are very uncomfortable with the topic we've discussed this past hour, but if it's the truth, and sometimes the truth is uncomfortable.
Well, if anyone's uncomfortable, come down to court and see how comfortable is it for me to sentence a young man to 20 years in prison. That's not something I enjoy. I would rather that young man to have had a better life.
And it's pretty rare that you have to do that to a person who had a father in the home, right?
Correct.
Well, it certainly is an important conversation, and hopefully the conversation will take place beyond this radio program. Hopefully people will hear this in the community, share this in the community, and hopefully that will spur others to talk about it, because it is the truth. You know, it's kind of an uncomfortable truth, but it is the truth, and people need to recognize that, and we need to work towards solving the problem.
Well, Mike, you say it is often an uncomfortable subject. People in this community need to be uncomfortable with the status quo. That's the problem. People have become too comfortable with the status quo. We need a lot more leaders and a lot more citizens and a lot more fathers uncomfortable with the situation we're in now. Only with that uncomfort will behavior change and we can save the lives of our youth.
Very good point. So Judge Tom Danheiser, thank you so much. And Judge Gary Bergosh, you as well. Thank you for joining us today on the Mike Bates Show.
Appreciate being here. I'm glad you're addressing this very important issue, Mike.
Mike, thank you for having us here. And again, anything we can do for you to get this information out, we're here to do so.
Well, this interview will be archived, as all my shows are, at www.themikebatesshow.com. So if a listener would like to listen to this, or for that matter, share it with others, just go to themikebatesshow.com. In the search bar, type in Fatherless Homes, and today's podcast will come up. So again, thank you both for joining me, and thank you for listening today to the Mike Bates Show.